Right, good morning everyone. My name is Wendy Perry, and before I tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here this morning, let me ask you a few questions. How would you feel if I told you that it's estimated that over 22 million parents and their children in the United States are being harmed in a most vicious and cruel way? You would consider that to be a national crisis. Now, what if I told you that mental health professionals, particularly forensic psychologists, the very people who could help stop this cruelty, the very people who could help stop this national crisis, are ignoring the problem? Now, what if I told you that they're not only ignoring the problem, many of them are actually aiding and abetting the perpetrators of this cruelty? And what if I told you that by their negligence and collusion, they're blatantly violating their ethical obligations? If I told you those things, you would be and should be outraged. I'm here to tell you that what I'm describing is not an imaginary scenario. It is in fact happening right now. You see, I am one of those 22 million parents. My story was told in a documentary called Divorce Court. Many people call this abuse parental alienation, which simply put is when a parent tries to damage or destroy a relationship that a child has with their other parent. It can go by many different names: parental alienation, family bond obstruction, parental gatekeeping, family relationship interference, domestic violence by proxy. Whatever name it goes by, it is causing grave harm and trauma to parents and their children. Parental alienation is child abuse. The pain and trauma, especially for the children, is unbearable. Left ignored, or even worse, assisted by unethical mental health professionals and by unethical family court judges, the trauma is resulting in members of our society who are left emotionally and mentally scarred for life. You see, this isn't just a problem that affects the 22 million parents and their children. It's a problem that affects our entire society. This problem is detectable and is diagnosable. So I have two more questions for you. Number one, why is this crisis being ignored? Number two, will you please join me and the other 22 million parents and the handful of mental health professionals who do care about this crisis in breaking the silence and demanding that the mental health community act ethically about this problem for the sake of children and our entire society in our country? Now I would like to introduce a great leader in the mission to eradicate parental alienation, the author of the petition Ending the Pathology of Parental Alienation for All Children Everywhere, which has been signed by over 19,000 people. He is a clinical psychologist who is sought after around the world for his expertise on parental alienation and for his hard-hitting honesty about those who can and should be part of the solution. It's a great honor to introduce Dr. Craig Childress.
Thank you, Wendy. Hello, I'm Dr. Craig Childress. I'm a clinical psychologist from Southern California, and I'm the author of this version of the petition to the APA. I'm in my role today as a clinical psychologist, serving as a conduit for these families to the American Psychological Association. Professional psychology is failing these families. Forensic psychology is failing these families. We are here delivering a petition to the APA, seeking their help in securing the necessary professional knowledge and professional competence required to solve severe family pathology in court-involved high-conflict divorce. There are two domains of psychology: forensic psychology, which handles all court-involved cases, such as affecting these families, and clinical psychology, which treats and solves everything else. ADHD, schizophrenia, trauma, autism, family conflict. Everything else besides court-involved cases is clinical psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist. It's my job to solve pathology. The world of court-involved high-conflict divorce is the world of forensic psychology, and it's a mess. Clinical psychology was banished from court-involved practice many years ago by the forensic psychologist. If a clinical psychologist offers an opinion about child custody or visitation, they'll lose their license. Only forensic psychologists are allowed to discuss custody and visitation issues involving the family, and only after having completed an extensive child custody evaluation costing between $20,000 to $40,000 and taking 6 to 9 months to complete. This places the input of professional psychology to the court surrounding high-conflict divorce beyond the financial capability of most families. And even when a child custody evaluation is completed, the conclusions and recommendations reached are idiosyncratic and arbitrary. Custody evaluators are free to apply, misapply, or not apply any, some, or none of the established constructs of professional psychology. As a clinical psychologist, I spent my career treating a variety of pathologies, from ADHD to trauma to schizophrenia to autism spectrum pathology. I came to the world of forensic psychology about a decade ago, treating one client. Before entering private practice, I was a clinical director for a childhood assessment and treatment center working with complex developmental trauma in the foster care system. When I left this position to enter private practice, I accepted a case of high family conflict and attachment bonding pathology referred to me by a family law attorney and court-ordered. That was my entry into the deeply troubling world of forensic psychology. The level of professional knowledge and professional standards of practice in forensic court-involved psychology are substantially below what would be considered acceptable in clinical psychology. Forensic court-involved psychology makes up new forms of pathology that are not found in the established domains of clinical psychology, and they define these supposedly new forms of pathology in arbitrary, idiosyncratic, and deeply troubling ways. Their conclusions, reached by their assessments of family pathology, are not scientifically supported or valid, and they know this. As for their treatments, they simply make up whatever they want on an individual case-by-case basis with no description or foundation in any of the professional literature of clinical psychology. In the world of forensic psychology surrounding high-conflict divorce, the fox has been put in charge of the henhouse, and the critical examination of the professional practices within forensic psychology is desperately needed. The lives of children and families are being irrevocably destroyed by rampant and unchecked professional ignorance and incompetence in forensic psychology regarding the established knowledge-based constructs and principles of professional psychology that serve as the ground foundation of clinical psychology. That is a strong allegation. The petition to the APA makes strong allegations. I can back them up. Professional psychology through the APA needs to take a look at what is occurring in forensic psychology surrounding high-conflict divorce and child custody. It is deeply troubling. I'll have more to say about this in a few minutes. But first I want to introduce a man who knows the pathology better than most. Rod McCall had his life devastated when he lost his son to the pathology. I wish I could say his experience was unique. It's not. While his experience was at the extremes for the pathology he endured and its ultimate result is also not surprising. The experience of Rod McCall is entirely consistent with the clinical psychology understanding for the pathology. So it is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce Rod McCall to speak to you of his son and the pathology.
Thank you, Dr. Childers, for that very kind welcome and introduction. As you said, my name is Rod McCall, and I am a victim and a survivor of what many call parental alienation. I'm nobody special. I was raised in a blue-collar family. I married a woman who was from a blue-collar family as well. My parents celebrated their 57th wedding anniversary this past May. We got married late in life at 27. Everything was fine. My wife had suffered for years from migraines, which were later diagnosed as pseudotumor cerebri. About 6 years into our marriage, Eric came, and we were both very excited, very happy for this. And at first, things were just fine. Then she began to engage in a variety of odd behavior. She would yell at me because I would tell Eric that before he could have dessert, he had to eat supper. That when we were cleaning up one set of toys, he had to pick up the others first. So before playing with the Legos, we had to pick up the Tinker toys first. He would get upset, he would be very angry, and he would go cry to his mother. His mother would comfort him, and at one point even said, "Well, Eric, I'll just get you a new daddy, a daddy who is not so mean." Years before our divorce began, she was involved in trying to create a wedge between my son and I. Yet I was the one that held him first. He came by C-section, and so I got to hold him before his mother did. And we had a very, very special, and what I took as a very tight bond. She was the first to tell Eric about our divorce. She told him while I was still out of town at my parents' house. I come home and he says, "Daddy, Daddy, please don't leave." Yet we had made the agreement that we would tell him together. The first claim of abuse came after I filed legal papers asking her to identify the man and 2 children who had moved into her house shortly after I had moved out. CPS investigated this claim and found that there was nothing there. It was a false allegation. 4 months later, she tried again, and this time CPS believed her. CPS pushed for an investigation, and as a consequence, I lost my visitation rights to Eric, I lost my teaching job, and ultimately I lost my freedom as I was arrested. The damage to my reputation for false allegation was very difficult for me to accept. 4 months and 2 court hearings later, though, my visitation was restored not by CPS, but by the judge himself. And I was very excited for this. Eric and I got to engage and be able to hang out a lot more. And as we made our exchanges, at first it was a hug hello, a hug goodbye. But as time went on, I wound up getting only a fist bump as a goodbye and no more hugs. He was afraid to show any positive emotion towards me. Eric was having issues at school, issues that concerned his principal, the school nurse, and his teacher. So much so that they volunteered to the amicus attorney that they would like to share these things whenever we came to trial. We had a psychological evaluation, and we had a new court-ordered play therapist to review what was happening with Eric and with us, and we wound up having a jury trial. A jury trial that she asked for as she was seeking to terminate my parental rights. After a week of trial and more than 6 hours of deliberation, a jury ruled 11-1 to actually terminate her parental rights. I was able to stay as Eric's father. The judge allowed her to go home and to say her final goodbye. Eric was supposed to be at school. It was a Friday. But he was held home because he was sick and was being babysat by her mother and father. I called ahead to the police and asked them to do a courtesy standby, and they said, well, somebody had already called 911 and police were already there. What I did not know at the time was that the police were there because they were afraid of me. She had called the police so many times on false claims that I was stalking her, stalking the house. So there I am at the front door, and I am knocking, hoping to be allowed in, when she pulls into the back drive. She walks up the stairs, takes Eric to the master bedroom, and she shoots him, and then shoots herself, all with me knocking at the front door. I was devastated. My entire world had just imploded. I had just an hour before legally gained custody of my son, only to have him taken away from me. And so for his 8th birthday, I got to bury him. I have been asked, is my case unique? Is what happened to me because of her unique background as a police officer, as a mental health professional with a master's degree in psychology, a PhD in criminology, was she uniquely situated to be able to manipulate the system? No. No, she is not. As a matter of fact, what happened to me keeps happening again and again and again. Just last month, a person in the DFW area is now suffering through what I have gone through, in which he went and killed his children and killed his ex-wife because he did not like that she had won. Parental alienation, hostile aggressive parenting, or any other form that we would like to call it, is child abuse, and it destroys families in every possible way that a family can be destroyed. My story, as I said, is not unique, and it is all too common. It needs to end, and it needs to end now. As we approach Father's Day, I found a photo. This was a photo that I found on Father's Day, 9 months after Eric had been killed. A true treasure that I keep close to my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, together we can make a difference. Together we can be on the forefront. Thank you very much.
Rod's story is moving. I wish it was unusual. Rod physically lost his son when his mother killed Eric rather than allow Eric and his father to have a loving and bonded relationship. This occurs in each and every family. Only in most families, the death is not physical, it's psychological. The aligned narcissistic borderline parent kills the child's relationship with the other parent. The targeted rejected parent used to have a child before the divorce, but after the divorce, they no longer have children. The child refuses to spend any time with the targeted parent, and what little time is spent together is marked by the child's excessive hostility, conflict, and the child's efforts to avoid and isolate from the parent. Soon the child refuses all visitation to the targeted parent, leading the parents who deeply love their children not seeing their children for years. 4 years. The parents used to have a child before the divorce, but the pathology of the narcissistic borderline parent kills the child's relationship with the other parent as surely as Eric died at his mother's hands. As a clinical psychologist, I've worked with all types of pathology, ADHD, trauma, autism, and this is the most horrific pathology I have ever encountered in my professional practice. To kill someone's children in revenge for the divorce and to use the child as the weapon to coerce and manipulate the child into psychologically killing their own parent is abhorrent. I came across my first case of this attachment pathology surrounding divorce about a decade ago when I entered private practice. Despite a career in professional psychology in which I had treated nearly every form of child and family pathology, I had never heard of the word parental alienation. You see, there's no such thing as parental alienation in clinical psychology. Oh, the pathology exists. It's extensively described in clinical psychology. We just haven't made up a new form of pathology unique in all of mental health to describe it. In clinical psychology, this pathology is described as a cross-generational coalition by the preeminent family systems therapists Murray Bowen, Salvador Minuchin, and Jay Haley. The pathology of a cross-generational coalition and the psychological boundary violations that cause it, called a perverse triangle, is extensively described in the family systems literature. Family systems therapy is one of the 4 primary schools of psychotherapy, and it's the only school to address current family relationship problems. As I entered into the domain of forensic court-involved psychology, I became appalled and shocked by the incredibly poor standards for knowledge and for standards of practice in forensic psychology, which are substantially below the standards for knowledge and standards of practice in clinical psychology. My first discovery was that forensic psychology simply makes up new forms of pathology that are not grounded in established psychological principles and constructs. They just make this stuff up. Like this supposedly new form of pathology, parental alienation. Then when I looked into how forensic psychology was defining this supposedly new form of pathology, it is an amazingly bad definition. The quality of the definition for parental alienation in forensic psychology is again substantially below the standards of practice in clinical psychology. They are simply making this stuff up. Again, this pathology absolutely exists. There's no arguing with the truth of Rod McCall and the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of families experiencing this pathology. It's just that the definition offered by forensic psychology is incredibly poor, unsupported by the professional literature, and substantially below the professional standards of practice. So as a clinical psychologist, I set about defining the pathology, the attachment-related family pathology people call parental alienation, using the standard and established constructs and principles of professional psychology. That's my book, Foundations. Foundations is not a theory, it's a diagnostic treatise. In clinical psychology, we absolutely know what this pathology is, using the standard and established constructs and principles of professional psychology. And we don't ever resort to making up new forms of pathology for types of child symptoms that we may not understand because of our ignorance. That's what an attachment-based model of parental alienation is, AEPA. It's a return of clinical psychology to court-involved practice. In my writings, I always put the term parental alienation in quotes to indicate that it's not a real form of pathology in clinical psychology, but instead represents a common culture term created within forensic psychology for a complex attachment-related personality disorder, family systems, developmental trauma pathology. Forensic psychology is sacrificing children to a horrific family pathology that requires the child to psychologically kill a beloved parent following divorce. The child used to have a mother or father, yet after the manipulative influence of the narcissistic borderline parent, the child's mother or father is now dead, at least psychologically and relationally to the child. The child no longer has a mother, the child no longer has a father, even though they do, even though their mother and father is still here and desperately wants to love the child.
Yes.
But the failure of forensic psychology doesn't stop there. As I continued into the world of forensic psychology, my professional concerns mounted. Not only does forensic psychology simply make up new forms of pathology, they also make up entirely new forms of therapy that they never describe in any book or article called reunification therapy. I'm a clinical psychologist. My PsyD degree, rather than a PhD degree, means I'm a super focused clinical psychologist. My specialty is all forms of therapy and the solution of pathology. That's what a PsyD degree means. There is no such thing as reunification therapy. There is no book, no article, nothing to ever describe any basis or procedures for something called reunification therapy. It is a term used to cover the fact that individual therapists are simply making stuff up and have no idea what they're actually doing. This supposed reunification therapy that's so prevalent throughout forensic psychology is a snake oil remedy, pure and simple. Who knows what's in it, and it'll most likely kill you rather than heal you. Forensic psychology simply makes stuff up. It makes up new forms of pathology that do not exist in clinical psychology, and they simply make up therapy that equally does not exist in clinical psychology. They're just making stuff up, and is it any wonder they cannot solve pathology? But it does not stop there. Possibly the most egregious aspect of forensic psychology are the child custody evaluations they use to assess family pathology and make recommendations. There is zero validity to the conclusions and recommendations reached by child custody evaluations. Zero. And all psychologists know this. It has to do with an issue called inter-rater reliability of assessment procedures. Child custody evaluations have no inter-rater reliability, meaning that different custody evaluators can reach entirely different conclusions and recommendations based on the same data. If an assessment procedure is not reliable, it cannot, by definition, be valid. If you start pulling on the string of inter-rater reliability with child custody evaluations, all of forensic psychology regarding child custody decision-making will begin to unravel. The conclusions and recommendations of child custody evaluations are no more valid than a monkey throwing darts at a dartboard. And the monkey is likely to be a lot less expensive and a lot more entertaining. Child custody evaluations cost between $20,000 to $40,000 to complete for each one, and typically take between 6 to 9 months to complete. They spend hours and hours meticulously collecting information, all billable time. They spend hours upon hours meticulously writing reports describing the collected information, all billable time. Yet when it comes to what the family information means, they just make stuff up. Literally, the custody evaluators just make up their conclusions and recommendations, not necessarily based on any established professional knowledge base, constructs, or principles in professional psychology. As an expert consultant and witness in these high-conflict family cases, I've had the opportunity to review these custody evaluations, which are typically sealed by the court. They're bad. As a clinical psychologist, they're really bad. They are far, far below the standard of practice for assessment in clinical psychology. If the conclusions and recommendations of child custody evaluations are not valid, and if every psychologist knows this, why isn't anyone in professional psychology disclosing this? $20,000 to $40,000 per evaluation. There is a financial incentive in forensic psychology to remain quiet. A conspiracy of silence in forensic psychology. The fox is in charge of the henhouse. Someone needs to take a look at forensic psychology. Turn over the rock of forensic psychology and high conflict divorce, and you'll find all sorts of deeply troubling, creepy crawly things living under that rock. It's no wonder that forensic psychology can't solve pathology, especially the complicated family pathology of high conflict divorce. They're just making stuff up over there. While in Washington, we are meeting with the offices of our congressional representatives to request congressional hearings into forensic psychology and child custody decision-making in the family courts. Yesterday, we also delivered the petition to the American Psychological Association, asking that the APA convene a conference of experts to look into forensic psychology and child custody decision-making in the family courts. Today, we are holding a press conference asking the press to look into forensic psychology and child custody decision-making in the family courts. Pull the string of inter-rater reliability for child custody evaluations and it will start to unravel. Ask if forensic psychologists are required to have training in the attachment system. No. Ask if forensic psychologists are required to have training in personality disorder pathology. No. Ask if forensic psychologists are required to have training in family systems therapy. No. Ask if forensic psychologists are required to have training in complex trauma. The answer is no. Instead of knowledge, they allow themselves to just make stuff up, and it is destroying the lives of children and families. Parents are no longer tolerating the profound professional ignorance and incompetence in forensic psychology that is destroying their children and families. Clinical psychology is returning to court-involved high-conflict divorce. The world is changing. Professional ignorance and incompetence are no longer acceptable.
Thank you, Rod, and thank you, Dr. Childress. I am constantly asked to give a simple definition of parental alienation. One way that parental alienation can be described in simple terms is parental alienation is when one parent tries to erase the other parent from their child's life. So how does it impact our society as a whole when one parent erases a child from the other parent's life? According to federal statistics, sources including the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the U.S. Census Bureau, children raised by single parents, that would include a parent that is erased by the other parent. These children account for the following: 63% of teen suicides, 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions, 71% of high school dropouts, 75% of children in chemical abuse centers, 85% of the prison population, 85% of children who exhibit behavioral disorders. Please think about that with recent current tragedies in our country. And 90% of homeless and runaway children. I'm known to many by a quote that I made years ago. The quote is, "Parental alienation can happen to anyone, so it should matter to everyone." Now I realize that my quote should be, "Parental alienation does affect everyone, so it should matter to everyone." I hope after hearing this today it will matter to you and that you will join us in the fight against parental alienation. Thank you. So we would like to open this up to questions if you guys have any questions for us. Also, we did put our materials on the table that is outside the door, and also want to make you aware that we're having a meet and greet tonight, just to meet people, have an opportunity to say hello and chat, and then Saturday night we are going to have a gathering on the west side of Capitol, so on the Capitol steps on the west side. And we're welcoming parents to come, grandparents, anyone affected by this pathology, to meet us there on the west side Capitol steps to do a photograph and just to meet each other. So again, if you have any questions for any of us, now's the time.
What has been the reception at the APA?
We met yesterday at the APA. And I thought their response to these parents was disrespectful. I'm troubled by their disrespect. Essentially, we met in a hallway out in front of the elevators, and it wasn't even shown the respect of sitting down and meeting somewhere. And the parents were told that they were forming a working group to look at high conflict families, which was exactly the same response the parents were given a year ago on the first petition that the parents wrote to the APA. They were told they were going to form a working group. A year later, there's no working group to study the literature. I corrected the representative, Mary Hardiman, and said this is not about study groups about the pathology. The pathology we know exists. This is about rampant and unchecked professional ignorance and incompetence in professional psychology. She asked if I wanted to submit, or her to submit, the petition over to the Ethics Committee of the APA, and I said yes. When I get back home, I'm going to file a statement with the Ethics Committee of the APA about this issue in forensic psychology. At this point, I consider the APA, as a clinical psychologist, to be on the clock. The petition to the APA is my ethical response under standards 1.04 and 1.05 of the Ethics Code, which requires that when I recognize ethical violations by my colleagues, I take action to stop it. And so this has been under standard 1.05, this is the petition to the APA. The APA is full of psychologists who are subject to the same standards. All we are asking for right now, we're asking for three things, but we're asking for an immediate press release from the APA that simply supports standard 2.01A of their ethics code, requiring professional competence. If the APA would simply issue a press release that says, we support standard 2.01 requiring, that would be immense to sending a message to all of psychology to up our game. They're silent. They won't even support their own ethics code requiring competence. And as far as I'm concerned, they're on the clock for that. And continued silence will represent collusion with the ignorance and incompetence. And so the APA's response has been troubling and disrespectful. Yes?
I have a question. A lot of these, in a lot of these states, the legislators, I know you don't want to get into legislation, but they're allowing parental kidnapping. And in my home state, I live in Texas, but my home state, I call it my state, is Iowa. The governor just signed a bill for status quo to allow parental kidnapping as long as you're retaining custody. And that's how it was before. She only added in some fines for a third party. 2 of my children were kidnapped by a PTA lady, or coerced by a PTA lady to put them on an airplane to go. So my question is, how do we get this, the psychology part in the mental abuse of a child? Because in these states it only says mental abuse. And then when we talk to the legislators, they go, that doesn't include psychological abuse. And then when we call the Iowa Department of Public Health, Texas Department of Public Health, and we say, what about coercive control? They said that's abuse, but we can't do anything until the legislators put it in.
So last fall, I presented to the Pennsylvania State Legislature on this issue. And what we are seeking from legislatures is changing the child abuse reporting laws to include psychological abuse, which is in the DSM-5. And this pathology, as a clinical psychologist, the DSM-5 diagnosis for it is B995.51 child psychological abuse confirmed. So in my private practice, and in my practice, when I come across this pathology, that's the DSM-5 diagnosis, it's child psychological abuse. So we're asking legislatures, state legislatures, to include that child psychological abuse in the definition in their literature. We are currently have a pilot program for the family courts up in Houston, Texas, that will solve this pathology. It's the return of clinical psychology to practice. And it is a replicable model that can be used in different jurisdictions. The Pennsylvania legislature was very interested in what we're doing in Houston. And if we develop the solution and clinical psychology can solve this pathology, then the issue of child kidnapping and those sorts of things, we'll get a handle on it. We need to stop this. Children are not weapons, and they should never be used as weapons in a divorce. But professional psychology right now is allowing and rewarding the weaponization of children. And it's up to professional psychology to make that stop. That's our job. And so we'll be moving forward with state legislatures in getting the necessary laws to do that. Yeah.
Where do you think the resistance comes from? Why would an association be resistant?
It depends. I can understand the resistance within forensic psychology because $20,000 to $40,000 for custody evaluation. Within the pilot program, clinical psychology can assess this pathology in a more narrow scope assessment in about 6 sessions, costing about $2,500. And so there's going to be considerable financial pressures to stop that. The troubling aspect is that the custody evaluations have no validity to them, and all psychologists know that because of this inter-rater reliability, and no one's saying anything. So there's a financial incentive on that.
Okay.
With the APA, I think it's just they're asleep. This is the backwater. High conflict divorce, they think forensic psychology has a handle on it. They're over attachment or ADHD or the other types of pathology. I was there. I was a clinical psychologist. I'd never heard of parental alienation. I avoid high conflict divorce. I'm prohibited from actually offering custody recommendations. Very dangerous to practicing. And so the APA, I think, is just asleep, and we're trying to wake them up to the issue. For example, yesterday when we meet, they're being told we're forming a working group to study high conflict divorce. That's not the issue. You didn't even read the petition. The issue is professional ignorance and incompetence, not what's going on here. We just want basic competence. Know what you're doing. Complex trauma, family systems therapy, attachment system, personality. Know what you're doing. But they're just inertia of apathy. This type of pathology is trauma pathology moving through generations. And the trauma pathology lives not only because of the abuser, but because of the apathy surrounded that doesn't stop the abuse. They don't care enough to look. And that's what's going on here. Nobody cares enough to look. And the people who should be looking, forensic psychology, are making lots of money from not solving things.
Okay.
Yes.
You talked about reunification not working. So if you're erased from your children, grandchildren, it's been over 4 years for us, and the court is moving forward with reuniting everybody. So if reunification doesn't work, how do you get those children to want to be back with their family in a way that it's not now ripping them away from the alienator?
Yeah, we never want, our goal is to bonded relationships with both parents. Okay, that's the goal. The reunification therapy is just a made-up kind of word that people in forensic psychology throw around. What's wanted is family systems therapy. And family systems therapy is going to identify it as cross-generational coalition, resulting in an emotional cutoff in the child's relationship with the other parent. That's the clinical psychology definition. And so what we want is to get the family systems therapy. Then once we work, the child's in a hostage situation. They cannot bond to the beloved parent because they're going to face retaliation from the other parent. And so once we understand that though, once we get the bonding back to this parent, the child's attachment system actually pops in pretty fast. Once we can protect the child from the retaliation from the other parent. And so there's various approaches we can use with that to solve things. Some very good approaches, some can restore it within a matter of a couple of days. We can get back pretty severe alienation. But first we have to be able to protect the child. Yeah.
Can you briefly describe the pilot program that you have going on in Texas?
The structure is essentially teaming a family therapist, a knowledgeable family therapist who has the necessary background knowledge, with an amicus attorney. And so that we're putting together a team, and the amicus attorney also has knowledge of what the pathology is. And so the court system is inherently adversarial, that creates conflict. what we're doing is getting a proper communication channel from the therapy to the court to provide the structure for that. Then it starts with whenever the court comes across a case of attachment-related pathology, something that they're, what's going on? The custody referral question is, what should the child's custody be? That's an overbroad and unanswerable question. What should the child? Professional psychology doesn't have the information to be able to answer that. A more limited scope question is, who's causing the pathology and what do we do about it? That's what this assessment is designed to look at. And so it's a 6-session, very structured, data-driven assessment protocol. If we identify the cross-generational coalition going on, then the court can appoint an amicus attorney and family systems therapist to put into that family and help stabilize the narcissistic borderline pathology that's creating all the conflict. In addition, every month, right now in Houston, we have about 15 family systems therapists and about 10 amicus attorneys who are working the program. And so we can, it's sort of interchangeable pieces on this. And every month, we're holding an online case consultation group. That's standard of practice in many more high-quality institutions. The staffing a patient. And so each month, we'll be reviewing intake assessments and ongoing cases. That improves the quality because it's not just one therapist, it's a team of people adding input about the family every month that's going on. And it's our job to stabilize the family. And if we need a court order, the therapist has access to the amicus attorney who moves through. In addition, let's say, and I described this to judges, and judges totally get this, which is whether or not a child takes soccer or music lessons is not a litigation issue. That's a family therapy issue. And so in family therapy, we can negotiate with two parents whether or not there's soccer, and we do problem solving, we do communication, but essentially it's going to come down to an impasse that doesn't solve. And it will be up to the family systems therapy to break the impasse because they're healthy and they know child development. And so let's say the family systems therapist says, we're going to go with soccer. So that's the decision. If they need a court order, they can get the amicus attorney to seek the court order. Now each parent has their rights to go to the court and say, no, I want music lessons. But if they do, the amicus attorney is going to speak to the court about what the therapy is. And the amicus attorney can sit in on the consultation groups. So they can hear all the discussion about the pathology and why the decision was made for the soccer over the, and so the amicus attorney can relay that to the court. If the court decides in favor of the amicus attorney, then whoever brought the case pays court costs. That de-incentivizes bringing everything into litigation and empowers the family systems therapist to guide the family into normal range conflict resolution. And so it's a treatment team approach, it's unifying the legal system with the therapy, and it's a return of clinical psychology, which solves pathology to court-involved cases. Yeah.
So, that sounds good in theory, but in reality, anyone with enough money and a legal background can manipulate the court system to drag out a court case over the course of years, and in that time, the damage is already done to the children. In Florida, and just because you're in DC, there's no getting away from talking about legislation. In Florida, we narrowly, there was a bill that narrowly defeated that would have given in custody cases at the onset 50-50 custody to both the mother and the father. And then if you wanted to litigate from there, meaning if you wanted to change the custody, you then had to proceed with a court case, but we weren't going into litigation from the start to determine over the course of 2 or 3 years who should have more custody.
Because that makes the child a custody prize to be won, and that's exactly the wrong thing.
Do you think that that is where the focus should be, first fixing legislation in the state to make 50-50 custody the norm?
I think it's not a matter of first, I think it's everywhere. That, in terms of professional psychology, There's no information that will allow us to say it's 60-40 or 70-30, or it's just impossible. That's an unanswerable question. There are 4 types of relationship: mother-son, mother-daughter, father-son, father-daughter. Each of those relationships is incredibly valuable to the child's development. Each of them is unique. None of them are more valuable than the other, and none of them are expendable. So just based on that principle, the only scientifically and theoretically based recommendation out of professional psychology is for 50-50 custody in all cases except child abuse. And that should just be the norm. And that's what the APA, the third request, we want the conference of experts to come together and look at this, because we want to expose that we're the ultimate hubris in professional psychology to think we can come up with some sort of 60-40 or 70-30, and no, we can't. There's no knowledge on that. There's no rational basis for that. 50-50 custody would de-incentivize litigation, and I think it's the only theoretically and scientifically supported rationale. And parents can come up with, if they want to agree to something else, that's fine, but not out of psychology.
Dr. Childress, just to follow up with your answer to that question, you said 50-50 should be the accepted norm, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, except in the cases of abuse. And Wendy stands up and introduces abuse, and parental alienation is abuse. So I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't the only one in the room that heard that.
That's correct. So if I return a DSM-5 diagnosis of child psychological abuse, that then warrants protective separation of the child from the abusive parent, as we would do with physical abuse or sexual abuse. We do not, however, stop there, because we want the child to have a bonded relationship to both parents. And we do that with physical abuse. I'm questionable about whether we do that with sexual abuse, but at least with physical abuse, we always work for the reunification with the previously abusive parent. We would do the same in this situation. And there's actually ways to help stabilize the child in the pathology. The issue is the child right now is in a hostage situation, and we have to be able to protect the child before we can ask the child to display their authenticity. You know, the hug versus a fist bump. That child was afraid to hug his dad because of the retaliation from mom. And if we cannot ask the child, hey, I want you to bond to Rod here because I'm exposing the child to the retaliation and the abusive parenting of the other parent. But it must require a confirmed DSM diagnosis made by a mental health professional of child psychological abuse. Not just, oh, I feel like maybe it should be, or otherwise it's 50-50. Yeah.
With this program that you're introducing to the courts, are you addressing the issue where a parent's behavior will not follow a custody order even if there is one in place, and why the court fails to enforce a custody order or a consequence on the parent to deter them from, continuing?
I have a tremendous amount of respect for the court. The court can decide what it wants to decide situations, and we will work with that. What we will provide input to from the court is the therapy side of things and the family stabilization side. So the amicus attorney who's working with the family therapist can provide input to the court that right now the court's getting a he said, she said kind of thing. This will allow the therapists who have knowledge of the family to provide input to the court. And so if there's constant violations of court orders, there are things that we can do to stop that treatment-wise, or else the court starts to leverage and say, you know what, you're psychologically abusing the child. The most important thing is not the behavior of the other parent, it's the symptoms in the child. If the child is not symptomatic, I don't care about the other parent. They can be crazy as sin, I don't care, as long as they don't affect the kid. As long as the kid's allowed to love both parents and to receive the love of both parents. Love from parents is mana to the child, that's everything. And so if we got loving parents who just simply want to love their child, oh my goodness, we should do everything possible to make that happen. Yes.
I have a question. These judges, though, are taking our children that are alienated into their chambers even when we as parents object, saying they can't be authentic, you've got the alienator out in the hall. And those children are gonna pick the alienator because he or she's out in the hall.
I'm all for listening to children. In fact, most of ADHD and stuff, and I'm out on the side of we need to listen. The one place we should not be listening to children is when there's high conflict between the parents. Because then we make the child a prize to be won. And that's exactly the wrong thing to do in a cross-generational coalition. We want to de-triangulate the child, not put the child in the middle and ask which parent do you want to choose.
Well, isn't that making also the judge, the child abuser themselves, making that an adultification? They're saying choose which parent you want to love.
It is, in my view, it is a collusion with the pathology. Collusion might be strong because the judge doesn't realize what they're doing in this. They think they're listening to the child, but they don't realize the destructive effect. When I came over here in forensic psychology and I found that people were, minors counsel, that the judge was listening to the child and pulling the child in the chamber, I was again just appalled. No, that's exactly the wrong thing to do in clinical psychology. Exactly the wrong thing to do, and yet it's happening all the time. Yeah.
You listed several deficiencies in training on the part of
Yes.
certain psychologists.
Court involvement.
And it's the training in the attachment system, training in personality disorder, pathology, training in family systems therapy, training in complex trauma. What is the barrier to having the professionals involved in high conflict divorce having that level of training? Is there a barrier? Is there just a lack of incentive? And if you had trained professionals, operating in that system, do you think that would solve the problem or help to solve the
To
problem?
answer the last question first, yes. The barrier is laziness and indolence. It would not be acceptable in clinical psychology. If you're treating PTSD trauma in Iraqi war vets, you have to know trauma and PTSD. If you're treating eating disorders, you have to know eating disorders. You have to. That's a violation of standard 2.01a. If you don't know eating disorders and you're treating eating disorders, that's a violation. Over here, this is an attachment pathology. The attachment system is the brain system for love and bonding. We have a problem in love and bonding. Then why aren't they required to know attachment? I don't know. Honest to God, I don't know. That's what the petition is. Can we please get the APA to say you need to know what you're doing? It's unfathomable to me. There is, as long as this pathology is not solved, and as long as it's required to get a $20,000 to $40,000 child custody evaluation to get mental health input, there is a financial disincentive to solving the pathology. And so there's a lot that is deeply troubling to me. Yeah.
To answer your question, or to add to what Dr. Childers was saying, my son had a play therapist, and my ex-wife calls the play therapist and says, my son is claiming sexual abuse by his father. The play therapist, rather than saying, well, you have an appointment tomorrow, I will talk with him at that point, she tells my ex-wife to have him draw a picture of what he experienced, tells her how to have him draw the picture. And it was this picture that was done supposedly by my son, but no one witnessing this picture being drawn by him, that was submitted to CPS, that was the foundation of their investigation that led to my arrest. Why did the therapist make that recommendation to the mother? I question.
And I hear these sorts of things. I was a clinical director of a treatment center dealing with childhood trauma, dealing with sex abuse. And if one of my therapists found out about, oh, there's a sex abuse allegation, we immediately stopped investigation into that and refer to CPS to protect the forensic evidence. We don't go exploring that. No, don't do that, don't do that. And so I hear a story like that and I go, oh my God, that is a horrific professional practice on this play therapist to recommend that the child draw it in the, oh my God. And it's all over the place. I hear story after story after. I read the custody evaluations. I read the treatment reports, and I'm going, oh my, but they're all sealed by the court. So nobody else gets to see these things. And I'm just going, oh my God, it's a mess over there. It's a mess. And somebody needs to look at that. I want the AP, that's their job, is to take a look at this and elevate the standards of practice across professional psychology.
Sorry. My case is horrible. I know everyone says that, but it's bad. The guardian ad litem's, a lot of them, like the ones that I had two in mine, two different sets of kids, same family, but anyway, one of them's making $500,000 a year. All guardian ad litems in some states are lawyers. So how do we get them to be psychologists? I mean, we push for legislation, but half the legislators are lawyers.
The issue is along the structure of that pilot program. We need to develop the professional knowledge, and the role of the guardians or minors counselor is filled by the amicus attorney. But the amicus attorney knows the pathology. When I went down to train the Houston program, I did 3 full days of training, 2 with the mental health professionals and 1 with the amicus attorneys. So I did a day of training with the amicus, and there was a judge sitting in on that training. And so the legal system is aware of the pathology, but the mental health system knows it. And then the mental health system can talk to the amicus attorney, and the amicus attorney can explain it to the court. That's the proper coordination. They're trying with guardians or minors count, but it's not working for various reasons. But the issue is, there's 2 approaches to clinical psychology solving issues. One is to solve problems. That's problematic because the more we focus on problems, they just condemn. The other is to create solutions. And that's our focus, is on creating solutions that will solve pathology secondary, because we have a solution.
And then I have one question on the title on the reunification therapy. Sorry, I'm getting all this from Iowa. Okay, there's a Title IV-B funding. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Title IV-B, instead of D and E, Title IV-B is for reunification therapy. It's for immigrants. It's for anyone that has a broken family. In Iowa, there's a thing called a FINA case you can file in juvenile court, which is families in need of assistance. And Chuck Grassley here, the Iowa senator, said that's for any of us, whether it's CPS or, in my case, where my ex kidnapped the children and turned them against me. And he says even if the court is out of money, they will have the reunification therapy done by a forensic psychologist or whatever, and then they'll get that money from the U.S. government with the Title IV-B funding. Now, the problem is when we ask for an expert, they're like, we don't have any in Iowa. So then they quash the
going to
expert.
the solution, the Houston program. What we're looking to do is develop a collaborative arrangement with one of the local universities down there. And we'd like the university to come in and be doing research on this high conflict divorce and stuff. And so there's a research component we'd like to coordinate with the university, but also a clinical training program. We would like the interns from the doctoral programs to do a rotation, to do an internship within the ABPA private program. And we would do seminars for them and maybe a class at the university. That would help improve the quality. When they graduate, they could then come in and know this. So it doesn't matter if you get a court order for reunification therapy, if your therapist is an ignorant idiot. My statement right now is we have electricians and plumbers doing open heart surgery,
Right.
and all the patients are dying.
Yeah.
We need at least surgeons, and please, I think this should be we need cardiac surgeons.
Yeah.
This is a very complicated, very difficult pathology.
I think it'd be amazing if you went to all the universities and talked to the kids in psychology class. That's where I go. I go
Yeah.
knock on. Yeah.
This needs to be a specialty practice. And that's the second part of the petition to the APA. The second remedy we're asking for is a designation of these families as a special population requiring specialized knowledge and expertise, so that we can get the complex trauma, attachment, personality as a standard of practice for all mental health professionals working with us.
And do you have anything in store, like, that you're thinking of to come into the schools, like they have anti-bullying? Because in the schools, a lot of parents are being erased from the records, even though our rights aren't terminated. Mine, in fact, they said if I show up for my daughter's graduation, my twins, last week, I'd be arrested. I said, I'll wear comfy clothes. And I went anyway. But they erased my name from all their records as if I'm nothing.
So I'm not aware of any programs right now that are educating schools about the problem, and that's a passion that I have and something that I'm going to focus on in the really near future, that I would really like to get into the school districts and educate the schools, because as you probably know, a lot of times it's in the school systems that the kids first present the signs of what we are calling parental alienation. They show it to their teachers and the office staff, you know, they're kind of that front line, and you've got the parents coming in, and one's trying to erase one from the emergency contact card, and you've got this going back and forth. They're trying to, you know, take each other off the card and put themselves back on. And the schools are in such a horrible position with this. You know, the schools don't know what to do about the teachers, the administrators, the principals, the office staff. And it's a huge problem in the schools, you know, and the kids are at school more than they're at home sometimes. So I think educating schools about this really needs to be a priority for us, and that's something that I want to focus on doing, is getting in and educating the schools.
Yeah.
That can really be one of the first places of detection, is in the school systems.
I'd love that. I want to be a part of this.
I'd just like to add, I think you have a better chance starting with the private schools and the charter schools. We had experience with a very expensive, I mean, again, you're paying for your kid to go to school. And as much as they were sympathetic to what was going on, particularly because his daughter was having outbursts at school, at school functions, in front of teachers and students and other parents, they still were very hands-off. Nobody wants to.
They're afraid, the schools are afraid to do anything. They don't know what to do with this, right? And they have liability issues that they have to deal with. And the poor teachers, they just want to teach, you know, and here they are spending all of these hours trying to deal with these family dynamics. And so it's so important that we get in and educate the schools. And we were one of those families that the schools had to deal with. And I felt so bad for the teachers and administrators at our schools. And it's incredibly important. And I met with the head of counseling for our entire school district, which was about 3,000 students at that time. And when I met with her, she said, I've never heard of parental alienation. What is that? And that horrified me. She was a psychologist. And she said she had not heard of it, was unaware of what it was. And I said, you're in charge of, you know, the well-being of 3,000 kids in what is supposed to be actually one of the most prestigious school districts in the state of Texas. And she was unaware of this problem in the schools. And I can tell you that I knew of at least a dozen families dealing with it within that one school district.
Someone running on the school board in Grapevine, Texas says this isn't happening in Grapevine schools. People are co-parenting it. No, they're not. I guarantee you they're not.
Well, we really need to educate the schools, the teachers, administrators, like I said, and help them. You know, that is a big burden on them. So we really need to get in and educate them. It's very important.
So I really, I can add on what she was saying about going to the universities. I hope that in universities or something that's in the works with this, because I think what inevitably ends up happening in these high conflict divorces that go on for years and years is that you end up with teenagers who go into the teen years, don't really want to deal with their parents at all anyways. And then the next real opportunity for them to start to get away from the alienator, to be out on their own is when they're in college. And I hope that that's a time, I think, for a lot of these kids of, you know, self-discovery, and if you can reach them then, there may be some hope that they will come to their own, you know, grapple with what happens, you know, their childhood on their own. Because I know once the courts are out of it, you're kind of left.
The time is on the side of the narcissistic borderline parent. The longer they can drag things out, the more entrenched the pathology becomes. In developmental psychology, there's a period about every 2 years the new systems come online. So you think think 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 12. And so there's about a 2-year cycle to development. And in each of those developmental phases, the parent-child relationship it has important implications. They're doing certain things during that phase of development that are important for the child's development. To lose a parent for a substantial portion or even the entirety of that 2-year period really significantly messes up the child's development. So we want to jump on this pathology and get it solved within 3 to 6 months. That's the goal. Get on it, it's 3 to 6 months. This idea of years in court and the hundreds of thousands of dollars it requires, it's denying the input of professional psychology to these families, and it's destroying the lives of families because we're not getting on it. We're not solving it.
Would it help to get in with the CDC and the ACE study, because the ACE study says this is a subcategory? If they're not really
Right
concerned.
now, parental alienation is in the backwater of professional psychology. Once we move it into the attachment system, it's going to move front and center. This is a transgenerational transmission of attachment trauma. This is, I come out of the attachment system people in clinical psychology. When they get a hold of and understand what this is, they're going to become very excited. And this is going to get a lot of research and a lot of interest within the attachment people in professional psychology.
Just getting back to the school issue, instead of trying to drag school teachers into this chaotic type of environment, what do you think about introducing programs to the schools that are teaching kids skills such as how to deal with loss, how to deal with disappointment, how to work on empathy skills, critical thinking skills, things like that that are not necessarily related to their issue at home, but would be skills that would help children to see in a greater perspective and possibly recognize if something is going on, and giving them tools to use, arbitrarily in different situations, how to respond if you're put in a position like that.
And that's my recommendation to school systems generally, is to have a post-divorce group. Not just for these kids, but for all kids going through divorce. And you just kind of run it twice a year, 6 sessions of teaching that sort. But for the kids out of this pathology, it helps them hear what other kids are going through. It helps them hear what normal divorce is like, and the difficulties and siblings coming in, and all the difficulties and just to make that part of. And you run it after school hours in their, after school programs and stuff. Just the school psychologist, or get somebody from the community come in, psychologist from the community, to just run a general post-divorce family adjustment groups for kids. I think it would be very valuable.
But I think it would also be really important to have some of this in curriculum in schools, because in schools, kids are taught about divorce and family relationships, and they just touch on it. They don't go into it really deeply, but they do talk about narcissistic personality disorder, other things that are related to this. And I know because I went through my kids' textbooks to see what is in their curriculum about this. And so, kids are aware of it. So for us to say, well, we can't talk about it in the schools, the kids already know about it, okay? They talk to their friends, they're going through it. They have friends who are going through it. So the kids are aware of it, and the kids would like to have more information. They would like to have more resources. So I think putting this into the curriculum is really important, and to start teaching kids at a young age about co-parenting, and about that it's not okay to try to erase the other parent from the child's life. This is something that can be in the curriculum and kids can be taught. And I was going to share with you that a few years ago I got asked to do an interview for a high school newspaper, and the newspaper was for the students. And the teacher who approached me said, our students want to learn about this because a lot of them are going through it. So I actually did an interview and then wrote an article for a high school newspaper that was for the students. So the kids want to hear about it. It's the adults who are hesitant or afraid to talk about it, but the kids are open to it because they do want to love both of their parents, and they want to know, how can I navigate this? How can I get through this really tough situation?
Dr. Childress, I just want to ask your opinion on, my daughter is 14 years old, and I've been alienated since she was 11. That's when this nightmare began. Now that she's 14, and I'm sure you're aware, or maybe it's just in Pennsylvania that they can, that 14-year-olds can make a decision as to their course of treatment. Their therapist is bound by HIPAA, of course, to prevent from any disclosure of drug abuse, sexual activity, STDs, or parental alienation. So I just wondered how you felt about that as it pertained to parental alienation, because where it is such a subspecialty of the field, the pathology begins long before the decision has been able to be made.
In clinical psychology, assessment leads to diagnosis. Diagnosis guides treatment. And so we'd start with the assessment of the daughter or the child, and based on the child's symptom display, we reach a diagnosis. If this pathology, if the symptom indicators are there for this pathology, the diagnosis is child psychological abuse. And so the question of whether the court should consider the child's opinions under that situation, it's essentially the child is under duress in that situation. And what we're offering the court is a DSM diagnosis of what the pathology is. The custody evaluations right now exempt themselves from the DSM diagnostic system.
Right.
In fact, they are told in their standards not to label a parent because that will prejudice against that parent, which my argument is that prejudice is the other way if you don't provide the diagnosis, and that what psychology is doing is essentially withholding information from the court in order to favor the pathological parent. I think that is professionally wrong. We don't, in professional psychology, withhold information from the court that the court should have to make decisions about the family. I think it's our job just to provide the court with the information. And that includes DSM. It appalls me that they exempt themselves from the DSM diagnosis. For family systems, no, it doesn't apply to us. Complex trauma doesn't apply to us. Attachment, no, we don't have to know any of the knowledge base, including the DSM diagnostic system. It kills me.
But then we go from the assessment to the conclusion where they come up with let's do reunification therapy. So they're actually diagnosing something that you're explaining to me is non-existent and as arbitrary as
so we got
color socks.
We got to bring clinical psychology back. The moment we do that, the clinical psychology can offer consultation input to the court. But it is very dangerous for clinical psychologists. We face licensing board. High conflict stuff is very dangerous. Clinical psychologists do not go into high conflict divorce. We stay away from it. It's dangerous because if we make a mistake and offer a custody break, when I said 50-50 custody, I'm putting my license on the line.
Right.
By even saying all families should have 50-50 custody, I'm not allowed to, am I overstepping my bounds? You know, it's like incredibly dangerous to us. And that's another thing. APA, can you please take the risk factor out of this for me by recognizing the pathology? This pathology lies. It lies a lot. It lies all the time. If you want to know how this pathology lies, think of a public figure in movies or politics you might think has a narcissistic personality, and look at the surrounding features. You will find lies all the time, all the time. And so when I'm a clinical psychologist working in, I'm going to face lots of lies, lots of stuff. They just throw out every old thing. And once we recognize the pathology, okay, we can stop chasing rabbits down rabbit holes. But until that happens, we're under danger. Us psychologists are under danger. And so it's no wonder that a lot of psychologists are reticent about identifying the pathology.
Well, they're fat. They're making 20 to 40.
Yeah, if I say that the alive parent is psychologically abusing the child, I'm going to face a custody licensing board complaint.
Right.
You know? My argument, though, is that if you don't identify it, that is a violation, or if you don't have the knowledge, that's a violation of the standard. And so you should face a licensing board complaint from the target parent. And so that's my alternate side. Yeah, we've got to wrap up a second.
I know, we only have 10 more minutes in this room, so we gotta wrap
I
it
got a
up.
garden I love.
My question is, we had a clinical psychologist because the alienating parent, when it was said in court that no abuse happened, immediately called the crisis unit to say that one of the children was acting out. So they sent out, an assessment, and then they gave a clinical psychologist like 10 sessions to work with the children. Well, through all of this working with the children, this clinical psychologist just spoke to the alienating parent and then took what he said and put it and directed it towards the children so that they can achieve the answers that they wanted. This went on for over a year, where then the judge considered this clinical psychologist, who we had filed ethics complaints against. She considered him to be an expert witness.
I would consider that, based on what you told me, a violation of standard 9.01A of the APA Ethics Code regarding comprehensiveness of assessment. If you're just listening to one side and not getting the other side, you don't have sufficient information to make a diagnostic statement or forensic testimony. So that's a violation of 9.01A. Does it happen? Yeah, all the time. And that's why we're going to the APA. It's happening all the time. These people are violating the ethics code, 9.01A, 2.01A, 3.04, 2.03. The principle D of the entire field is violating principle D, which says people should have equal access to psychological services. When you put $20,000 to $40,000 for child custody evaluation, you are denying access to psychological services except to those who have the wealthiest end of things. That's a violation of principle D of the APA Ethics Code. There's just rampant, unchecked, massive professional ignorance and violation out there.
I think, sorry, I was just going to mention one thing because we've touched on 50-50 custody a few times, and we're not here to really, discuss or debate 50-50 custody, but something that and I'm sure that you're all aware of it, but, you cannot, no certain percentage of parenting time will stop a narcissistic personality from engaging in alienating behaviors. So it's just a point for people to understand, that if you are dealing with that personality engaging in alienating behaviors, that is, in a sense, a separate issue from a percentage of parenting time.
Yeah, and from clinical psychology, what you're saying is a narcissistic borderline parent will triangulate the child into the spousal conflict, using the child as a regulatory object to stabilize the personality pathology of the parent. Absolutely. We know that all the time, forever and ever. That's what's going to happen in the family. That's not news in clinical psychology. And so we have to take that into consideration on the solution. We have attachment personality pathology in this parent. The issue is the family still exists. Divorce ends the marriage, it doesn't end the family. And so our goal is to stabilize the post-divorce separated family structure. That includes a personality disordered parent. Okay, we'll have to figure that out and stabilize this so that the child is allowed to love both parents and receive the love of both parents. That's what we're going to have to do in clinical psychology. And we need the support of the court, and we can get the support of the court, and there's ways to do that. But first there has to be a motivation to solve this in psychology. And right now there isn't. Psychology is failing families, failing the court system. And please, American Psychological Association, do something about it.